the retention periods required by law. So obviously there are times where hard copies might be misplaced, and it's important to find them. We've constantly made recommendations and findings about the importance of good record management and accurate data collection. So yes, I would express concern over the fact that contract documents can't be located.
Thank you very much. That's your time, Mr. Nader. Turn now to Ms. Bradford joining us virtually. You have the floor for up to 5 minutes, please, Ms. Bradford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for joining us this morning. Getting back to the Executive Procurement Review Committee, who sits on that committee? Mr. Moore?
Very happy to answer that question. So I chaired it for the first 8 meetings, and then it's actually the chair has now been taken over by the Executive Vice President, because the President wanted to demonstrate her commitment to ensuring that we make these changes and implement the recommendations arising from the recommendations in the 2 audit reports. It comprises a number of vice presidents, but it also comprises technical specialists from the Procurement Directorate and a number of other sort of assurance providers, including security and including internal audit. So it's a wide-ranging committee with the mandate to challenge all of the proposals that are coming up and to seek assurance that all of the procurement rules and regulations are being complied with.
What would be the total number of members on the committee?
I think it's getting on for 10 to 12, depending on the numbers who are attending.
And how often do they meet?
Well, as I said earlier, the idea is to have it weekly. I think ultimately it would like to become bi-weekly, but at the moment the volume of activity is requiring a weekly meeting.
And does the committee review all contracts, or how do they decide which ones to look at if they don't look at all of them?
So initially we set a level of $40,000. So below $40,000, we've delegated authority to the Procurement Directorate. Anything above $40,000 for contract or task authorizations has to come to the committee. In addition, at the moment, anything above $1 million has to also go to the whole Executive Committee, which includes the President and the Executive Vice President.
So why was the amount of $40,000 chosen as a threshold?
That was on the advice of the Procurement Directorate, based on the level of risk associated with contracts above and below that limit.
So what would happen if the committee were to have concerns with a contract during one of their reviews? What action would be taken?
So it has already happened a number of times. So normally the action is to go back and ask additional questions, which have to come back with answers. So we have seen some contracts come back to the committee 2 or 3 times, depending on whether all the questions are answered. Ultimately, it's an approval committee. So if it is not approved by the Procurement Review Committee, it will not go ahead.
Now, Mr. Moore, in your opening remarks, you actually mentioned that about $6 million was spent on non-IT costs for ArriveCAN. Could you explain what kind of expenses were included in the non-IT amounts?
Well, so $6.1 million was spent with Service Canada, their call centre. So the call centre was set up to take questions from members of the travelling public. They actually managed over 645,000 calls during the period under review. That was for individuals returning to Canada who may have questions around ArriveCAN, had questions around the vaccine certification and others. So that was one example of a non-IT related cost. But we do recognise that the majority of these costs were IT related.
Okay, so both Mr. Moore and Mr. Vlaming, have either of you worked with Mindone, Cameron McDonald, or Anthony Utano before?
So I joined the agency, as I said earlier, in January of 2018. Mindone was certainly there at the time, and so I've worked with him as a colleague on the Executive Committee. I had less to do with Cameron McDonald or Mr. Utano because they reported directly to Mindone. But we did see them occasionally at some Executive Committee meetings.
And Mr. Vlaming, what was your interaction with any of these individuals?
I've never worked directly with him at the CBSA. When Mr. Doan was CTO of Canada, I had a number of interactions as relevant to that role.
Okay, could you elaborate on those interactions?
So as Chief Technology Officer, there's a number of monthly meetings with all the CIOs around town that I would have attended as well. And additionally, I did meet with Min shortly after I joined just to get a debrief on the ISTB function at CBSA.
So, did either of you have any concerns about their contact with their conduct with the contractors during the early days of the pandemic and during the development of the ArriveCAN app?
No,
Either one of you?
I had no concerns, and no concerns were raised at our level. I think just for context of how busy we were during that period, it was all hands on deck. We were working incredibly long hours on a large number of different things. So it was very difficult to establish the same procedures and protocols as we are doing now.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Beginning our third round, Mr. Viersen joining us virtually. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. Mr. Moore, presumably your department has emergency planning in place. Would that be the case?
Yes, so we have a standing emergency plan which was utilised during the pandemic. As I've said earlier, we established 3 separate governance committees. We decided to split the operational crisis management committees into 2. The internal task force, which I chaired, and the border task force, which was chaired by the vice president of the Travellers branch. They both reported to the emergency management committee, which was the executive committee. In the early days, that committee met daily throughout, 24/7 essentially. Over time, that frequency of those meetings started to go down slightly. But it was definitely operating in an emergency management approach across the entire country, because also all of the individual regions also were having to manage with a vast change in their approach to how they operated the border. A lot of the ports of entry, certainly the ones which were commercial, were operating incredibly hard, whereas some of the traveller ones actually saw a very big reduction in the volume because of the volumes.
Was this the first time you've experienced
Just one
in
second,
your role?
Mr. Viersen. I have a point of order. Yes, Ms. Yep.
I just would like the chair to remind those in the room not to take photos.
Oh,
Thank you.
I did not catch that. You are absolutely correct. There should be no photos. I'm going to have the clerk check with you, Ms. Yip, as to who you spotted, and I will instruct the clerk to have them delete the photo or photos. If you would just check that, I'll keep running the meeting. Thank you, Ms. Yip. Turning now back to Mr. Viersen, you have 3.5 minutes to go, please. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Moore, in your time as in your position, is this the first time your department used this emergency planning procedure?
It uses it on a sadly on 2 regular basis. So, for example, I think a few months ago where there was the tragic accident in the United States around Rainbow Bridge, the Southern Ontario region had to bring in their emergency planning for that, especially during the period when it could have been considered to be a terrorist attack. So any operational activity at the border, we will bring in our emergency management procedures.
Okay, so this is not the first time that this has happened. It seems unique then that there would be a general COVID fund. Was that unique?
So it was unique, but it was also a product of what we were having to do. So, for example, we had to increase the cleaning of our ports of entry and to do it twice a day rather than once a day. We had to secure, with the help of a public health agency and PSPC, all of the PPE. We had to buy sanitization cabinets to allow the officers to actually steam, clean their tools and things like that. So lots of different things.
It was a very broad fund.
It was a very broad fund covering a number of different activities.
Okay, so you would say like a COVID slush fund.
It was definitely not a COVID slush fund. It was an emergency management fund. And in the first year, we provided $5 million to the Information Science and Technology branch to partially cover their costs of the first year of the ArriveCAN app.
From soup to nuts, you could put that in that fund, or it was basically an expense account.
Well, it was an emergency management committee decision, so all decisions went to the emergency management committee, who decided what they were going to be funding with that money.
Okay. What kind of oversight did the minister have of that particular fund?
So the minister had no oversight on that because we were taking this money from our operational funding. So when the minister has oversight when the mains estimates are agreed or when supplementary estimates are agreed, but that would be the only time the minister would have oversight.
Would he have known about this COVID slush fund?
He certainly would not. He probably would not have known about the emergency management fund, but I can't comment on whether the president at that time referred to it.
So from protective gloves, masks, cleaning equipment to IT sourcing, that would have all gone through the same funding.
Yes, and in the first year it was about $20 million in total.
And so you can see how the Auditor General would have had a challenge in dissecting this particular slush fund.
Well, I think I do, and I said at the start, we did not have a separate code for all the different activities. It did all go into this fund, and we learned that lesson. That was a mistake. We should have set up separate codes at the start, but I'm afraid that is part of a problem of being able to identify exactly where the funding went to.
Hence, the conclusion that this was a slush fund rather than an emergency management fund. Mr. Chair, I think that's my time. Thank you very much.
That is, Mr. Bierson. Thank you very much. Turning now to Ms. Shanahan, joining us virtually. You have the floor, Ms. Shanahan. Over to you, please.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and I too thank the witnesses for appearing here today, and I do appreciate some of the testimony that we heard just prior regarding the Emergency Management Fund. So I'd like to ask Mr. Moore if there's anything that he can add to that, because having a border, one of the largest land borders in my riding, I have many workers, CBSA workers, who live in the riding of Chateauguay-Lacolle, and I know how much they were working during that time and the pressures that they had in addition to their usual duties.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Yes, I'd like to hear more. Yes.
Our priority at all times was the health and safety of our officers at the front line and also our staff in headquarters. So providing them with sufficient PPE to do their job, which at that time was considered to be a very dangerous job. They were meeting people who were returning to the country who may well have had COVID. And as I have said previously, there was a lot of fear about whether they could catch COVID from touching papers. That's one of the main reasons why the ArriveCAN app was developed, to allow that information to be given electronically. So definitely, our officers were looking for reassurance, and we provided that reassurance to the best of our ability. We provided it through PPE. As I've said before, we provided it through sanitization cabinets, which weren't available in all ports of entry, but now they're a standard feature in the ports of entry. So we took the health and safety very seriously, and that was all managed through the internal task force.
And Mr. Moore, you mentioned in your opening remarks something to the effect of should have been created earlier. So I just want to clarify, are you talking about the ArriveCAN app? Because I know in my travels, including Australia, the electronic border entry app is mandatory and is certainly very critical to the proper management of border entry.
No, I think I was talking about setting up a separate accounting code, but actually the app was developed in just about 6 weeks, which was incredibly fast given the challenges which everyone was facing at the time of COVID. The Auditor General did identify there was an ongoing benefit from the ArriveCAN app because it is still used, and in fact I used it yesterday myself, and by using it in airports, about 300,000 people a month do use it, so just over 3.5 million people.
I appreciate that, and I do agree. And with that, Chair, I move that when the committee undertakes to invite witnesses, that a witness list submission deadline be set by the Chair with the explicit consent of the committee, that witnesses be invited proportionately to each recognized party standing in the House, and that no such witnesses no such witness be invited without proper instruction of the committee. Chair, I have that motion that can be delivered to all members forthwith.
Thank you, Ms. Shanahan. Have you delivered it to the clerk in both official languages?
I believe so. Let me just check.
I'm just going to suspend. I'm just going to huddle with the clerk for a second then. But in the meantime, if you could check, please. And I pause the time. Just 1 second, Mr. Desjardins. Mr. Desjardins, I assume you want to speak to this, Mr. Desjardins, or is it a point of order? Yeah, just give me a few minutes.
I guess it's a point of order in relation to just the supply of the motion.
How do you mean
I
by
might have
this?
missed-
What do you mean by the supplies? And is it coming to you?
Like, did the clerk send us? Yeah.
No, I'm going to check right that. All I have
Oh,
is
I
Shanahan reading it. I'm just going to check right now with the clerk. 1 sec, please. Mr. Viersen, is that a point of order or just lining up?
Just on the motion.
Just 1 sec, please. Thank you, Ms. Shanahan. The clerk's going to send it to members in a few moments. Ms. Shanahan, I'm going to take this as you are tabling this motion. It does not. I'll come back to you in a second. I will allow you to respond. It does not.
Yeah.
It is in the broad category of committee business, which of course is acceptable, but not. Does not pertain to the business at hand with this ongoing meeting. You are welcome to respond to that. We, of course, can pick it up. I am willing to. I am willing to seek additional time on Tuesday if you do. If you're in agreement, but you go ahead, please, Ms. Shanahan.
Chair, I am moving this motion.
So I'm going to move it out of order. It does not. I'll explain why. It does not. It does not pertain to the business at hand. It is a broad motion with respect to how this committee can operate, and of course we could pick it up next week. And as an alternative to members, I propose we finish off today's meeting with witnesses we have, and then we deal with this motion early next week. Ms. Shanahan, you still have two minutes.
I challenge that decision, Mr. Chair.
Very good. We'll have a vote then. Clerk, please call the roll call.
Shall the decision of the chair be sustained? Ms. Bradford.
I vote against.
Mr. Van Bynen.
I vote against.
Ms. Khalid.
I vote no.
Ms. Shanahan.
No.
Ms. Yip.
No.
Mr. Nader.
Yes.
Mr. Brock.
Yes.
Mr. Viersen.
Yes.
Madame Saint-Clair Desgagnés.
Oui.
Mr. Desjardins.
Against.
Five nays, 5 yeas.
Sorry, what was that again?
Five.
How did Mr. Desjardins vote?
Against.
Mr. Desjardins, can you just confirm your vote? Are you voting to uphold my ruling, or are you voting to have this motion accepted and we will move into debate on this motion?
I'll accept the motion.
So you are moving to debate this motion right now?
Against. Yeah,
Very good.
exactly.
Very good. All right. The committee has overruled the chair, and we are going to debate this motion. Mr. Vierson, you're up first, it looks like. Over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I do recall, I'm a relative new member to this committee, and I do recall the name drop of Mr. Christofferson, of who I had the privilege of serving on committee with in the past, by Ms. Shanahan. And she laid out for me very early on in my time here at this committee that this committee generally operated on a consensus basis, and that it was she was the one that informed me that Mr. Christofferson had said that when this committee was working well, you couldn't tell which party the member was from, or whether the member was an opposition member or a government member. So I find it quite surprising that that this motion is coming from Ms. Shanahan in particular today, that demanding that there would be equal representation of witnesses and based on party allocation and things like that. So I'm surprised. I don't think that that is the spirit of this committee, and I would vote against this motion. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Desjardins, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And although you know that I
Appel au
appreciate...
règlement, Monsieur le Président.
On a point of order, Mr. Chairperson, just if you could hold on a second, Mr. Desjardins, there's a question, a point of order rather. We haven't received the motion in both official languages yet, so before we debate it, I'd like to get my hands on it.
Meeting until all members have the motion. It was sent to the clerk. I know the clerk is busy working on it, so Mr. Desjardins, if you can just hold for a minute or two, I'll come right back, and I'm going to suspend this meeting. And I do have a list of people that wish to speak to it after you, Mr. Desjardins. I've got Ms. Killiad and then Mr. Nader. But allow me to suspend. And as for witnesses, if you can just hang tight for a couple of minutes, we'll see how this goes. 1 sec, please. And on that, I'll suspend. choses officielles. Puis c'est le tour de M. Desjardins. Mr. Desjardins, you have the floor. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Looking at the motion, I do believe that it's important, particularly for my party and our smaller representation in this committee, to be able to have input on our witness list and to be able to have consent, a standard of a convention of policies across most committees in the House of Commons. And so I think it's quite consistent with existing procedure. So I'd be happy to dispose of this as when you can in order for us to return to the witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Desjardins. Ms. Killey, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Chair. And very much like Mr. Desjardins, I really believe that it's imperative for us to have full sway and full consensus as we work on the important matters that this committee deals with. You know, over the past number of months that I've been part of this committee, I have had the privilege and the honor to work with all members, regardless of party, to come together to build that consensus, to find ways to move forward, to actually tackle the issues that public accounts is tasked with within our government, within our parliament. And time again, I have had to remind you, Chair, and remind committee members that that we are willing to play ball here. That can we please have say in when meetings are called, in just an understanding as to which the witnesses are. We are trying our very best to work with the committee to ensure that we are doing what taxpayers, what Canadians want us to do. And it is getting increasingly difficult for us on our side, and I won't speak to other members and other parties, but I know that for us, it's becoming more and more difficult for us to be able to have a say in when meetings are held, when we are in our constituents trying to do the important work for our constituents, which witnesses are called without having any regard what the rest of the committee wants, Chair. And so I think as much as I would not have wanted this motion to put forward, because I personally thought that this was a general understanding as to how we operate as a committee, it's sad that we have to put this motion forward, but I fully support it because that's the nature of how parliamentary committees work. That is how we should be able to operate with consensus, with ensuring that every party has representatives and an equal say in which witnesses are called, in when meetings are held. Trust me, Chair, it's not just you. We all care about what the issues are that are discussed in this committee, and we want to work with you, Chair. And so I'm really hoping that all members of this committee can support this motion because it is important to how we function as a nonpartisan, multipartisan committee that cares about the public and the issues that the public is interested in. So I'll stop there, Chair, and express my support for this motion.
Thank you very much, Ms. Khalid. Mr. Nader, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be exceptionally brief so this can go to a vote. Chair, I'm old enough to remember when parliamentary secretaries weren't supposed to be on committees. That was a Liberal platform promise, but here we are with the Liberal parliamentary secretary carrying water for the PMO and the Liberal National Caucus chair moving this motion. Obviously, they're not happy with the damning testimony they're hearing about incompetence and corruption within the government related to ArriveCAN.
I would raise a point of order, Chair, but I think I'll let it pass.
But you didn't. Obviously, there's no point of order because there is no point of order that Ms. Khalid can raise because obviously what they're doing is trying to disrupt the work of this committee and getting the bottom of ArriveCAN. So I look forward to this motion being passed in every single Liberal-chaired committee as well. And it's unfortunate the Liberals don't have the dedication to log on to Zoom for 2 hours during a constituency week. I know here on the Conservative side we're ready to do the work on behalf of Canadians and get to the bottom, get answers on ArriveCAN. That's my comments, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Nader. Madame Secrétaire d'État, s'il vous plaît.
Merci pour être pris.
Well, thank you. Just to clarify the wording of the motion, I take issue with point A of the motion. It states that there would be a deadline for a list of definitive witnesses. So who sets the deadline? I'd like Ms. Shanahan to explain that to me. And secondly, it means once the deadline is set, that no further witnesses can be added to the study, which would strike me as problematic, because as a study progresses, one is able to determine who the relevant witnesses might be to that specific study. And that's the case precisely with ArriveCAN. You know, we are finding as we go along that there are relevant witnesses that should appear. So I, would like some kind of predictability about what's going to occur in the committee, but I don't think we should tie our hands right from the outset. It's not a good idea to do that at the beginning of the study, and I think we should have some level of flexibility in that regard.
Vinny?
Have you finished?
Shanahan, do you like to that, or?
Très brièvement.
Well, it's very briefly, if I may. I think I said what I had to say at the start of the meeting. But, the normal process at committee is that, we call witnesses, but the normal process hasn't been followed here at the Public Accounts Committee. Under normal conditions, and this has been the long-term practice, that we invite, for example, the Auditor General with the officials from the department concerned, for example, regarding the Auditor General's report in this case. But as you can see, we've had 10 meetings on this particular topic of ArriveCAN. It's also being studied at other committees, and witnesses are being called to appear left, right and centre. So it's normal that there would be a process, a procedure that would be followed as far as our work is concerned, that in fact is in line with the wishes of all members of the committee. And it's my belief that it's okay that the chair set the date, but it should be in consultation with the members. That's the normal way of doing things.
Charity from the chair's perspective. On point 8, Ms. Shanahan, looking to set a deadline for witnesses with the explicit consent of the committee. Do you envision kind of a standard deadline that the committee will approve once, or is it meeting by meeting? And could you give me a sense of how many days you think is adequate? I'm curious to know. There's an issue with point B, of course, is that often for the bulk of our reports, there is no consultation on the, or rather, we're on autopilot when it comes to witnesses. We have the auditor and the subjects of the audits. So is this are you talking kind of extraordinary meetings? How do you propose that works given the typical work that this committee does? And no such witness be invited without instruction of the committee. So are you saying, does this kind of negate that they're proportional? Would the committee have to approve all witnesses, or if whatever ratio is agreed to, say 4-2 and 1-1, the witnesses can be invited, or do all witnesses have to be approved by the committee? And so giving some members the ability to veto witnesses that a party might want to hear from. Could you respond to those, please, to give the Claire some...
Chair, you're an experienced member, and I think and many of us have sat on other committees, so we know that when we are faced with a study where where the committee has already agreed that we're going to undertake that study, and we are inviting witnesses outside the normal scope of public accounts is a committee where we have sort of our guaranteed witnesses, which is the Auditor General and the officials of the department that are directly concerned. And so it is because it has come about in this session of Parliament that we are being confronted with the unilateral invitation of witnesses outside of our normal functioning. That we want to see. This motion speaks to the practice that other committees have, which is that there's consultation with the members, and that the chair proceeds in consultation with the members, with the added caveat that in public accounts, it's been the normal practice that this be done by consensus, but at least that we had that consultation done en bonne et due forme, as we say. So I think the motion is clear, and I, for one, am ready to vote on it.
Very good. Ms. Khalid, you have the floor. Then I'll have another question. Over to you, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I just wanted to add to everything that Ms. Shanahan has said, which I 100% agree with. There is no veto power, as is with all committees. Every party submits their witness list, and those witnesses are invited to come and appear before the committee. We're not talking about, whether a party can veto. This is not the United Nations Security Council. We are trying to be as inclusive as possible here. And so I don't anticipate any veto power. I think that members should be given the opportunity to be able to invite witnesses in a consensus format and to be able to have a heads up and to have some say and some consultation in when meetings are held. We all lead very, very busy lives within our constituencies, doing the important work for our constituents and in Parliament and with this committee as well. So we want to be able to build that consensus and to work together, Chair. This is really the purpose of the motion.
Thank you. Could I get a sense from you, Ms. Shanahan? How do you? I'm serious about this. How do you see this motion? So the subcommittee had a meeting and laid out priorities, and there was broad agreement there was broad opposition agreement to continue the ArriveCAN study. If this motion passes, do you see that this is immediate and tomorrow's meeting needs to be rescheduled, and we need to bring forward, and the same thing for next week, that we're going to put a freeze on the work that the clerk and the work the clerk has done to arrange it under my instructions based on what I had received coming out of the subcommittee meeting. Could you respond to those two, how you see this motion? Is this an immediate or a go forward?
This is a go forward, Chair, and I'm ready to vote on the motion. I think we all understand. I'm not going to prejudge what other members say. We're ready to vote.
All right. That's very, very helpful, Ms. Shanahan. Mr. Desjardins, you have the floor.
Thanks, John. Just to make greater clarity under aspect A, just hearing from my colleagues around the table about a witness list submission deadline set by the chair, which I agree with. I think you can determine, John, Mr. Chair, in my perspective, when that happens because of that portion there, just to answer that question in my perspective. I also think that when it says the explicit consent of the committee, I don't think it means the consensus of the committee. I think a consent happens largely by way of by a majority vote. And so I think a majority vote of the committee is the explicit consent that I understand point A to read.
Thank you. Anything else, Mr. Desjardins? Nope, that's helpful. Mr. Barrett, you have the floor.
Yeah, Chair, it's beyond parody that the Liberals want to be able to call rebuttal witnesses to the Auditor General of Canada. So we see that this is a Liberal cover-up. They're trying to cover up their $60 million ArriveCAN.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Let's go to a vote. If they're not comfortable with what's happening in their government.
I have a point of order, then I'll return the floor to you, Mr. Barrett. Yes, Ms. Khalid, you have the floor.
I find exception to us being blamed.
Ms. Khalid, that is a point of debate. Witnesses. I will give you the floor after Mr. Barrett is done, and you're welcome to have a rebuttal. Mr. Barrett, you have the floor again.
Yeah, Chair. The Liberals, including Ms. Khalid, should vote for their cover-up and to be able to bring rebuttal witnesses to the Auditor General when they don't like the news that's reported on in this massive corruption scandal. So I'd be interested to see who they'd bring out. I guess they'll bring Christian Firth as their expert witness to rebut the Auditor General. We believe Ms. Hogan. We understand they believe Mr. Firth. So let's have a vote.
Thank you. Ms. Yip, you have a point of order, or is it a point of debate? Because I do have Ms. Khalid on it. Thank you. Ms. Khalid, I've said I'd put you down. Do you have anything to add? All right. Seeing no other interveners, Clerk, could you please call a vote?
Shall the motion of Ms. Shanahan carry? Ms. Bradford?
In favor.
Mr. Van Bynen?
In favor.
Ms. Khalid?
Yes.
Ms. Shanahan?
Yes.
Ms. Yip?
Yes.
Mr. Nader? No. Mr. Brock?
No.
Mr. Viersen?
No.
Madame Saint-Claude Desgagnés?
Non.
Mr. Desjardins?
Yes.
6 yeas, 4 nays.
Very good. The motion is carried. I will, of course, follow it. Attorney Nell, we're going to finish up our rounds. I apologize for the delay to our witnesses. Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor for 2 minutes and about 10 seconds.
Point of order, Chair.
Just 1 second. Ms. Shanahan. Yes, Mr. Brock.
Given the unnecessary intervention that lasted close to 45 minutes, do we have resources beyond 12 o'clock?
Well, I am going to work on that right now, so I can get back to the committee. It, though, is my intention, though, to see us through, both finish this third round that we're just at the beginning, and then finish up the fourth round. So, Ms. Shannon, you have the floor for 2 minutes, 10 seconds, please.
Yes, well, thank you, Chair. And going back to Mr. Moore talking about the ArriveCAN application itself, is the ArriveCAN application, as we heard from the Auditor General, does have enduring value, and you mentioned it just before we move to the motion. Can you speak to what that means for the CBSA, the enduring value?
And I think, I think what I said to Ogo last week, I do believe the ArriveCAN application provided value for money, but I do also accept it didn't provide best value for the taxpayer. So when you're looking at value for money, you have to look at economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. And the Auditor General has recognised that it was an effective app in order to provide FAC with information about quarantine on a timely basis to allow them to do their job. In terms of efficiency, I think I also have spoken about it cost about $1, the ArriveCAN app, whereas the paper-based process was costing about $3. So there's definitely a more efficient approach to the paper-based process. When we talk about economy, there is a judgment there. And we've talked previously about, differences in terms of what we count, in terms of the money. But I think we all agree that we know that there was not sufficient information to record all of the expenditures correctly. Some of that we are going to be dealing with, but also we recognise that we should have had an accounting code at the start.
Well, thank you for that, because I think that's important to note that the ArriveCAN project was conceived as something that would save money to the CBSA. So the fact that it didn't, though, and we were all shocked with the testimony of people like Mr. Yeo to this committee, who was very proud to say that he was a conservative member, conservative donor, member of the People's Party of Canada, which means that he's not somebody that believes in tracking vaccination rates and so on. It was very bizarre, but he was very happy to make money on the ArriveCAN. What can you do to make sure that people like that don't get involved in projects again?
So I think it's very difficult for me to comment on that, because what we want to see in procurement is a fair, equal process, and everyone should be allowed to have the opportunity to compete fairly to actually drive value for money for the public service. So one of the issues for us is we did allow this to run too long. We did use the same contractors for too long, and I think that's one of our core lessons to be learnt. And and I fully support the approach of having open competition, fair, transparent competition to allow us all to get the best value for money.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Suivant, c'est Madame Sécla-Desgagnés pour 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Ms. Sécla-Desgagnés, 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I'd just like to jump on the last point you mentioned, Mr. Moore. You talked about value for money, efficiency. However, it started in 2010, we saw an explosion, 2015, 2018, and now in 2021, the CBSA awards about 20% of its contracts, or even a tad more, that are non-competitive. Now, do you consider that all these non-competitive contracts do provide value for money to taxpayers?
I think it's a complicated answer to a complicated question. So I think the principle set out in the directives is for always to have competition in all of our procurements. But sometimes, for the reasons of national security, that's not always possible. But also there are other good reasons in terms of things like intellectual property rights and elsewhere. So it depends on the contract.
D'accord. Et pour des raisons de sécurité nationale.
I see. And for national security reasons, we see that was the reason given during the pandemic. But in 2023, well, the pandemic is over. There's no emergency. So why award so many non-competitive contracts, even nowadays?
We have to look at these individually. So, for example, just recently, we have approved a national security exemption for biometric data capture. That's for security reasons. But what I'm pleased to say is, unlike what happened during COVID, we discussed that at the Procurement Review Committee twice before agreeing to that national security exemption, which we then sent over to PSPC. So we have greater oversight, greater governance on these decisions.
D'accord.
I see. But the fact remains we're talking about over 20%. That's huge. That's a gigantic number of contracts. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that are being awarded non-competitively. And you've singled out one single example on the basis of a national security exemption. You said that it's not always the case, but given that the pandemic is well and truly behind us, we're talking about a huge amount of money. We're talking about an exception here. That's the important thing to remember. There are procurement rules. There are supposed to be exceptions, of course. The problem is that when it's 1 out of every 4 or every 5 contracts, that's no longer exceptions. It becomes kind of par for the course, that there would be non-competitive contracts awarded, and that is a problem in my eyes. And for a lot of people, moreover, it doesn't demonstrate that taxpayers are getting value for money, bang for their buck.
I certainly agree with you that non-competitive contracts do not always.
Allez-vous faire quelque chose à ce sujet? Allez-vous regarder plus?
Are you going to do something about it? Are you going to take a close look at this? Why there are so many non-competitive contracts awarded?
Well, we are looking at it through the Procurement Review Committee. So one of our first challenges for every single contract which we look at is, why is it going to be non-competitive? As I said before, for reasons of national security, that was acceptable. But I don't believe that the Procurement Review Committee would accept if there wasn't a very strong case.
Et voilà, merci beaucoup. Suivant, Mr. Desjardins, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Moore, you mentioned at our last round of questioning that although everyone in your ministry is responsible for financial oversight and ensuring accountability or responsibility, you're accountable to ensuring, or we're accountable to ensuring, that some of this cost for dollar, but most particularly the transparency and accountability piece for the contracts, was met. And so what level of accountability have you faced in terms of what has taken place, and what changes will you make as you continue this work?
So I think, as I previously said, we have a very comprehensive procurement improvement plan, which we are now working through to ensure that we deliver those improvements. And
how does that hold you accountable?
Well, I am accountable for that procurement review plan. I established the Procurement Review Committee. I've overseen the procurement improvement plan over the last 9 months. I'm also looking very extensively.
But you can see, can you see the problem, though, Mr. Moore? Like, having you do this work, particularly considering the fact that so much of this work was basic information that wasn't able to be found. It's a reasonable question to suggest that Canadians might not have trust in the internal systems that you're creating, considering that for the better period of a very long time in CBSA, that this information wasn't always up to par. And we see that for particularly the governance structure, for example. The governance structure was lacking between the Public Service Procurement Canada and even CBSA. We heard from Public Service Procurement Canada that they didn't know who was responsible at the time for what. And so it's likely to assume that if they didn't know that and they were your contracting partner, that your ministry also didn't know that. Is that correct?
No, I would say it's not correct. It was very clear who the technical authorities on all of those contracts were.
That's not what Procurement Service and Procurement Canada said, though. So who's right? Who we like to believe? PC, the Public Service, Procurement Canada, or you?
I do not think we're disagreeing. I think it's clear what the responsibilities of the contract authority are and what the responsibilities are of the technical and project.
The Auditor General said in herself, in our examination of contracting practice, we saw little documentation to support how and why the Canada Border Service Agency initially awarded GC Strategies the ArriveCAN contract through non-competitive processes. Only one potential contractor submitted a proposal, and that proposal did not come from GC Strategies. Can you explain that?
Well, I think that is partly subject to the internal investigation review, which I can't comment on, as I do not know how that has progressed. But I think it's also a wider recommendation arising out of our action plan about knowledge management systems and how we record. As I said before, employees at all levels are responsible for documenting, but there's still a lot of work for us to do to ensure that's happening. That's why.
But how could you not be? How could you not see
I'm afraid that
gross
is
mismanagement?
Mr. Deja, that is your time. I'm afraid it is my intention to give you one more slot before we wrap up today. We're still working on that. Mr. Brock, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Moore, I am so grateful you're actually part of a panel with the Auditor General. In fact, you're sitting right next to Mr. Hayes, the Deputy Attorney General, Auditor General, I should say. Now, last week, about a week ago, exactly a week ago, I asked you a question. You couldn't answer the question. I wanted to know why you deliberately, your agency, the CBSA, not you personally, why the CBSA deliberately misled and lied to the Auditor General when saying that GC Strategies actually provided a proposal for the initial contract to work with the CBSA. That's what the CBSA confirmed to the Auditor General. The Auditor General confirmed that, in fact, that was false. So here's your opportunity to come clean to Canadians and to members of this committee. You, as a representative of the CBSA, why did you mislead the Auditor General?
So as a representative of the CBSA, I do not believe the CBSA did mislead the Auditor General. There were different choices at that time, and one of the choices was to have an in-house developed project using staff augmentation, which is the GC Strategies.
I'll stop you right there. Are you suggesting the Auditor General simply got it wrong? They looked for a proposal on the initial contract with CBSA that you said you had in your possession from GC Strategies, and they confirmed it wasn't there.
Well, I think what you're referring to is missing documentation, which I think has been subject to a number of different inquiries. Lots of different people have been looking for the documentation, and that is also part of the investigation to see whether the documentation is missing because of COVID or because of some other reason.
GC Strategy, specifically Mr. Firth, when he attended a few weeks ago, refused to answer questions regarding his involvement in the $25 million IT service contract, stating that responding to that question would somehow jeopardize the RCMP investigation. So we know through the Auditor General's report that I'm sure that you have read that GC, Government of Canada Strategies, was directly involved in the drafting the narrow terms of that $25 million IT service contract.
Point of order,
Just one
Chair.
second, Mr. Brock. Yes, Ms. Shanahan?
Yeah, it's just on this Government of Canada that Mr. Brock is referring to. Is this an official name? I'm just
That's not
confused.
a
It's
point.
GC Strategies.
Ms. Shanahan, that's
as I-
not a point of order. If the witness is seeking clarity, they're entitled to ask, but not members. Mr. Brock, I don't know if you want to ask your question again. I'll give you time if you do. So
that's fine.
Please do.
For Ms. Shanahan's benefit, it was actually Mr. Firth himself who confirmed that the GC stands for Government of Canada. Not my words. Your witness, Ms. Shanahan, Mr. Firth. So, Mr. Firth, through GC Strategies, created their own terms, drafted their own contract, which surprisingly they actually won. 25 million tax dollars, Canadian taxpayer dollars. Who at CBSA allowed that to happen?
Well, I think, as I've said previously, it is unacceptable for.
No, sir, I know it's unacceptable. Everyone knows it's unacceptable. You're the one responsible. You're accountable for this mess. You're accountable for failures. Now provide us some answers. Who at the CBSA, I want names and I want positions, allowed Government of Canada Strategies to draft their own contract worth 25 million taxpayer dollars? Name, sir.
Well, that is, as I've said before, it's the Border Technologies and Innovation Directorate which were responsible for that.
Give me a name. Not a department, give me a name.
Well, the DG is Mr. MacDonald, and the Executive Director was Mr. Utano. They were responsible for drafting that statement of work.
Are you saying it was Mr. MacDonald and Mr. Utano who allowed GC Strategies to write their own contract? Is that your evidence?
I'm not saying that at all, but I'm saying that's what
that's the question I'm putting to you, sir. How more simpler can I phrase it? Who at CBSA allowed this
Mr.
to
Brock.
happen?
I've taught Miss Khalid. What is your point of order?
With the years of experience we've had, we treat our witnesses with a little bit more respect than what Mr. Brock is treating our witnesses as right now.
That is not a point of order. Mr. Brock is trying to get an answer and is becoming, I think, rightly